And so it's upon us, the time of year when us gardeners get very glum about the longer nights and shorter days. And I know I'm not alone in checking the forecast every night, just to make sure I can keep my tender plants out just that bit longer. And for me, here in Dorset, so far the weather has been relatively forgiving. It's been windy and it's been wet, but the temperatures haven't really dropped below 10. But it's not all doom and gloom. This change in the weather has brought out some of the autumn colours that we were hoping to achieve in the garden. I mean, just look at the crazy colours on this tree. It's called a Rhus typhina or Staghorn Sumac, and every time I look out the window the colours just get more and more surreal. And the intense light of that low winter sun is just really helping to show it off. And these autumn colours have revealed a happy accident in the garden. As the leaves on this Rhus tree start to change to their autumn colours, they perfectly match the orange Hedychium greenii that's planted in front of them. And as I said before, I am constantly checking the weather forecast in fear of a frost coming. Every single one of my tender plants is still out in the garden and I want to enjoy them for as long as possible. I've even got this houseplant out in the garden, which is my Schefflera. I love this plant because it grew from a cutting of my grandparents' plant, and I used to earn my pocket money wiping the dust off its leaves for them. And my really small Begonia luxurians that I almost lost this year is still out in the garden, and it is very tender, so I want to get this in as soon as the sign of the first frost comes. And I've realised that I'm starting to become a bit obsessed with begonias. This begonia is called Angel's Blush and is supposed to be hardy, but I've only got one and I'm toying with the idea of lifting it just to make sure I can get it through to next year. I love begonias. They're great for shady spots and they come in so many different shapes, textures and colours. And I know most of you love this colocasia. This one's called Blue Hawaii. And I never actually took it out of its plastic pot, which is lazy really, but it makes it so much easier for me to move it into a greenhouse to protect it through winter. And the first round of spent flowers from that lovely orange ginger that I showed you earlier are starting to form tiny plantlets or bulbils. I'm going to leave these ones on the plant for as long as possible before I pot them up. And that Hedychium greenii is the only ginger that flowered in my garden this year. But I'm a novice. It's my first year growing gingers in the tiny tropical garden, so I'm going to experiment and just see what works. But hopefully, as the clumps establish, they'll flower more and more reliably. But if I'm honest, they look really tropical just as foliage plants, especially this one. This one's called Dr. Moy and it has variegated leaves. Some of the plants that have proved to flower more reliably for me this year than the gingers are this Alstroemeria, Indian Summers, which has been flowering forever, as well as this Dahlia, the classic Bishop of Lambeth. This is great for late summer colour, and I think it's going to keep flowering until the frosts hit the plant. My Amaranthus is really starting to look a bit wet and soggy, and I don't think this is going to be in the garden that much longer. It's going to rot away before long. My elephant ears, or Colocasia esculentus, are loving all of this rainwater and they've really perked up. And the newly planted evergreen Rolldana behind them isn't looking great at the moment, but it will perk up when it gets over the stress of being moved. Another evergreen I've got in the garden is this Melianthus major. It's a really structural plant with serrated leaves and it flowers early in the spring, so long as there's a mild winter. And if you rub its leaves, it smells of peanut butter, which I love. My beautiful Canna Cleopatra is putting out amazing foliage, but has been slow to flower. This week, however, it's teasing me with petals, so I think it's going to bloom soon, and I'll be sure to share that with you. And I'm loving the giant blooms on my Fatsia japonica, and I completely forgot that this was going to flower at this time of year. Fatsias are fantastic plants for any tropical or exotic style of garden, and they provide late food sources for pollinators. It's a win-win. And in my own tiny tropical garden, I've got what I'm calling the unofficial national collection of Fatsias. I've got regular, spider's web, variegated, and polycarpa, and each one of them is budding up, ready to put out some of those impressive blooms to feed the pollinators. Now, time for me to admit a mistake and make a change in my garden. I planted this Camarops right next to a path, and just look at those spikes. I planted it for evergreen, exotic looking leaves, but it's just going to get too big for its spot, and it will end up ripping every person to shreds that walks past the path. So instead, I'm actually going to plant my Schefflera taiwaniana in the ground. This is the plant that I'm going to put in its place. It's evergreen, and it's in the same family as Fatsias, so it will just sit nicely in the rest of my garden. Why not? This Camarops palm tree was one of the first plants I put into my garden, so it's been in for just under 2 years, and man has it put its roots down. But after a couple of sweaty hours, huffing and puffing, I managed to dig it out. I'm going to donate this one to my sister. She's just bought her first house and wants a tropical garden. I'll just make sure she plants it where she actually wants it to stay. And because I've learnt my lesson about rushing into planting choices, I've sat the Schefflera in its pot where I think I might plant it. But I'm not going to rush. I'm going to leave it here in the pot and just see how I like the look of it as I walk past. I'm sure that I'm going to have to dig up this Ensete banana in the next couple of weeks before the cold weather comes. But until then, I can appreciate just how big these leaves have got. It's a great plant for any tropical or exotic garden. And the Ensete bananas just pair really nicely with other dark-leaved exotic plants, like these cannas that I have planted in front of it. I had to cut back my kangaroo apple, or Solanum alacinatum, because the wind snapped the branches. But I was lucky, I managed to do it just above the fruit, so hopefully this will ripen and I'll get plenty of seeds to grow some more plants next year. They grow quickly, so I'm not too concerned. So the weather is definitely turned. But I'm enjoying all of the changes that it's bringing to the garden. Whether it's the late season pollinators, the autumn colours, or the fact I'm not standing behind a hose pipe every evening. There's just something about this time of year where you can step back and enjoy watching the garden persist as long into autumn and winter as possible. Especially with these tropical and exotic style gardens. Just when you see the rest of the countryside fading away, it's so nice to come home and see this lush foliage and this amount of colour. But with the garden looking this good in autumn, I'm sure in the coming weeks I'll be filming and uploading a video on how to lift and protect your tender plants for winter. Until then, feel free to check out the Tiny Tropical Garden website for more information on exotic gardening. Hit subscribe and comment below if you've got any tips or questions. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.